Following is a presentation by Ann Morrison on Twiland.info, her science blog website. She's on hour 2 on the Nutrimedical Report show on Republic Broadcasting from 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time. That's an hour later. That's 2 to 3 p.m. On Eastern Time Zone. And accompanied by Dr. Bill Deagle, MD. And we will be discussing a number of very important topics. To start with, Ann, we have the first topic that you covered during the show today, Zika virus. Any new updates besides the show you want to present today? Any other specific issues?
Well, I do. I want to reiterate what the count is, at least as far as the CDC is reporting it. They're saying there's locally acquired cases in the United States of 215. Now, you understand that we have been told by Dr. Fauci of the NIH that for that number by 10 because the counts are not coming in. Well, there's a lag in getting the counts in.
Right.
So there are currently then 2,150 locally acquired mosquito cases probably. And travel cases, 4,541. And altogether then, if we multiply the sum by 10, we get 47,560 cases in the United States. And 38 of those are sexually transmitted, and 13 have already produced the Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Right, just the ascending paralysis syndrome.
Ascending paralysis syndrome. That's where the paralysis starts in the feet and works up the legs, and if it gets as far as the rib cage, the diaphragm, then you die because you can't breathe. You need your diaphragm in order to breathe.
Right.
But sometimes it doesn't get that far. Sometimes it progressively gets better. Sometimes you just end up with a paralysis of your legs forever. Okay, in the U.S. territories, and here we're talking specifically about Puerto Rico, locally acquired cases, that means they were acquired by mosquito bite or by transmission from somebody who has Zika and may not be showing any symptoms, 34,463. Now we multiply that by 10, we get 344,630.
Wow, that's a lot of cases.
Yes, travel-associated cases are 131 for a total of, and I'm going to multiply this by 10, 345,940, and 51 or 510. 51 times 10 is 510 is Guillain-Barré syndrome. By far in the United States, the cases there's 98% of the cases are in Florida. And so that's a lot.
Yeah.
And only 2% are currently in Texas, and the other states have not reported. Now, they have reported deaths of babies, either stillborn or after birth, but they are not releasing the states where those deaths have occurred. The states now have to report, the local health departments have to report cases of Zika to the CDC. We do not know. I think that sending in information about dead babies is encouraged, but it's not required.
Right.
So this is a little difficult for those of us who want to know, why aren't they saying that Zika is sexually transmitted? Just put it on the STD list. The doctors know what to do with something that's on the STD list. They ask the person. If they come in and they have Zika, they say, well, who are your partners? Who have you had sex with?
Right.
And they confidentially contact these people, and they say, you have been exposed to Zika. We want to test you and make sure you don't have it. And then if they do, then they ask about their partners. And this has worked very well over probably a century that they've been doing it for STDs such as syphilis and gonorrhea and such things. And so why aren't they doing this with Zika? Well, I don't know, and I think you should call up your local health department and find out. Why aren't you doing this? And did you report them all to the CDC? This is a serious disease. and it will probably result in the decline of our population. Certainly our fertility rates will be going down.
Amazing.
All right. I want to talk about, there was a study, and you remember that Zika came across the Pacific Ocean. It started in Yap. Well, it started in the Philippines. It went to Yap, which is an island, a very small island. Went to Tonga, went to Tahiti, which is now known as French Polynesia. Well, somebody said, well, this was between 2009 and 2012, they said, well, let's check on Hawaii. And they did. They went back and they looked into the paper trail for a birth where microcephaly was implicated in the birth, and then apparently these blood samples were kept. And they were able to actually go in and look at the antibody-positive mothers, and they found that yes, microcephaly increased, and it increased in those mothers who had Zika. So this is an indication that Zika was in the Hawaiian Islands. Now, we don't know that it was carried by mosquito. It was probably carried by a traveler, and it may have been carried by more than one traveler. They didn't have a big sample, but I really commend them for looking into Hawaii, because it seems strange since all these other islands were getting Zika that Hawaii didn't.
Yeah.
All right. I have information about the I have to scroll down. America's demographic squeeze. And the problem is that the Census Bureau has forecast the population, and what's happening is that we're getting more people who are over 65 than they projected we would in 2008, and we're getting fewer people who are under 65 in 2012 as opposed to 2008. So in 4 years, we've got a double bind. We have a falling birth rate and a much slower immigration into the country. So, the politicians have been using immigration to offset the fertility rate for, I say at least 20 years. They've been bringing in immigrants from all over the world.
Right, especially in places like Canada, they've done so much abortion there. I mean, a child born with Down syndrome is an anomaly in Canada. It's a very vicious place.
The number of babies born to 1,000 women of childbearing age, and this is called the general fertility rate, fell to 63 in the 12 months that ended in June of 2016 of this year. And that's the lowest general fertility rate since at least 1920, and well below the recent high of 69, which was recorded in 2007. Now, in 2007, we went into a recession. So we can expect that the recession would, people don't generally, if they don't have money, they don't want to have to raise a baby.
Right.
Now, the total fertility rate, which is different than the general fertility rate, adjusts for the age of the population, and this has fallen, and it's currently at 1.9, which is below the replacement rate of 2.1. So it has fallen significantly since 2007. We're not replacing our population. The birth rate has fallen especially sharply for immigrant women and for women of reproductive age. It's a worry, because when your fertility rate falls and your birth rate falls, well, what happens is, and somebody, I forget now, the Census Bureau, there's somebody who wrote an article about, they analyzed some of the census data, and the Census Bureau reported on December 20th this year, so about, 10 days ago. So 10 days ago, the Census Bureau made a report and said that America's population grew at 0.7% since July 1st, 2015 to July 1st, 2016. So it's the slowest rate of increase since the Great Depression. What that means is that they have analyzed it, and from 1970 until about where we are right now, the growth from 1970 of Americans and replacement level immigration, in other words, numbers of babies that they had minus the death rate, was going up. So it was going from 236 million, and they said that it would probably top out about 255 million. But the new immigrants, so then they separated out the new immigrants who started coming into that hadn't been in the country before 1970, and they started having babies, and they're projecting that these new immigrants will be above the replacement level and their descendants, and so the peak in 2020 will probably be 571 million.
Wow.
But the important thing, well, I think the important thing is that we are going to turn our country over to the immigrants that came in after 1970. In other words, it won't be the same country because it won't have 100% of the people who settled here over the first 100 years, from 1650 to 1750, and or their descendants. Instead, it's going to belong to the new immigrants and their descendants. And this is a very negative forecast because it means that we won't be able to maintain our customs, and we're turning over our country.
Well, especially if you have people like Hillary that want millions and millions of people from the Middle East, from North Africa, that want Sharia law and Islam and a police state, and that's going to be really bad. So people need to understand that you either make babies or you get prepared to become a minority.
Well, the reason I put this under Zika is because women are now postponing making babies or starting families because of the Zika problem. They don't want to have to deal with 40% of the women who have Zika. 40% of their babies they'll either be stillborn or they won't live very long, and they certainly won't reproduce. So that drops the fertility rate.
Right.
And this is a big problem with Zika. Women who decide not to start families or increase their families, and also the fact that the babies that are having a lot of them are dying. So we don't have the replacement babies that we need in order to keep our population growing.
Yeah.
And that's where Zika comes in. And you need to think about the demographic trends that are occurring because of this terrible virus.
Right.
All right, I'd like to talk about what this administration is doing as far as the BLM. The BLM is the Bureau of Land Management, and they got into a fracas with Cliven Bundy, and then so anyway, and I guess that's settled now, although I think they're still claiming he was $1 million or something. Anyway, the administration has made 2 new national monuments. The Gold Butte National Monument is in Nevada, and it's 300,000 acres, and it's close to where Clive Bundy and the BLM people had a fracas.
Right.
Not too long ago, 2 years ago, I think. Then the other new one is the new Bears Ears Buttes National Monument. It's in Utah, and it's close to 2 million acres in southeastern Utah. Now, the reason they said that they wanted to make these national monuments was because, well, let's talk about Gold Butte, is because Gold Butte is a petroglyphic site, and that means that our Native American ancestors, a long time before North America was settled by anybody, made cave drawings,
right.
And so they can trace their duration on this land for a long time back. unfortunately, sometimes, and people used to have to walk into this. You know, these were hikers and people who wanted to see the petroglyphs, but some of them were vandals, and so they they said, well, we need to turn this into a national monument. No, they did not need to turn 300,000 acres into a national monument, and they shouldn't. I mean, they're not legally allowed to do that. The state has to take a vote. The people have to agree that the land will be transferred to the federal government, and in such a way that the land is protected, but that the public has access. Now, what they're going to do is they're going to build, this is off of Interstate 15, exit 112, and they're going to, from there, 25 miles into this rather rocky, well, not rocky, but, you know, you don't do anything there.
It's a very remote area where you'd wonder, and of course, if they make a road, there'll be a lot more traffic, which could destroy a lot of the historical and petroglyphic information, right?
Well, that's exactly it. If you have to walk in 25 miles, that's going to deter a lot of people from going into this site. And but they're going to build a road, and they're going to have a visitor center. So I think there's going to be damage not only from the cars going in, but you're right. There'll be a lot more people who have access to this, which, you know, maybe that's not such a bad thing. At the same time, though, they're not saying it's a national monument. We know that they do not protect national monuments, and I think that they would have done better to sell this 300,000 acres to maybe University of Nevada, and they could have put a school there, and they've been responsible. They could have a school, a school of mines, a school of archaeology, a school of ancient history, a school of whatever, and had some research going on there, and then they would have to provide the security for these caves.
Right.
Now, that makes a lot more sense to me, and they could make money giving guided tours into the caves and writing papers and hosting international symposiums,
right,
for because people around the world are interested in these petroglyphs.
Right.
And so I think they just did it because they were peeved at Clive Bundy.
Well, not only that, the federal government authorized a license to mine uranium that, believe it or not, this is part of the deal that the Clintons set up to give 20% of the uranium to the Russians.
Yes, I know about that, and that's on my blog about 4 months ago.
Right.
And it's still there.
Okay, well, let's go to the other site.
Yeah, the other site is in southeastern Utah, and it's called the Bears Ears Buttes National Monument, and it's 1.9 million acres, so I'm just going to say 2 million acres. And it's a nice site. It's close to the Navajo reservation, and so somebody got the Navajos to propose that they make this into a national monument, and it is on US 95 and US 276 and US 261, and so it's got a lot of roads into it anyway. It isn't that they won't be making any more roads, but the Indians said that what they did was they used the Antiquities Act, which was passed in the early 20th century, maybe 1920 or so, and it's never been used before to make a national monument, but the Native Americans, the Navajos, pushed for a national monument using the Antiquities Act. So I don't even know, there's no precedent for this. You know, there's no precedent to build a national monument using the Antiquities Act.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any special minerals or anything under there where somebody's going to get a kickback.
Well, this is in Utah.
Yeah.
Now, you know the Bureau of Land Management owns or controls 95% of Nevada, and they also control a significant portion of Utah. Both the attorney generals from both Utah and Nevada have said that they're going to sue in court and tell them, and say that the states have to make the decision whether it's going to be passed into federal lands or not, federal control. And they said that wasn't done, and so it's the federal government is taking their land without representation, and it's completely illegal, unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional. What's the next topic again?
I want to talk about. Now, this is a person that you should know the name of. He's a leading climate scientist, and his name is James Hansen. And he has written he's just written an article. And what he wants, he used to work, he was the head of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York for nearly 35 years. And so he worked for NASA. And he retired in 2013, about 3 years ago or 4 years. And he has testified before Congress. Now, you understand that climate change should have been run by the National Weather Service and NOAA especially. I mean, this was the purview of NOAA. But both of those agencies, along with the NIH and CDC, have been compromised by crony capitalism. That is, they do what the government wants. And if the government says there's no climate change, there's no climate change. We know that because that's what George Bush says. He says you're not gonna publish anything about climate change. And finally,
I think
people did leave those organizations.
Some of the people that Trump has appointed want to ignore some of the drivers, and we're not just talking about climate change. We're talking about pollution, ozone damage, the destruction of the what's called carbon-oxygen cycle. Because there's 100,000 dead zones in the ocean.
Yes, well, we'll get to that. So I just want to talk about what James Hansen is doing. So he's retired, and he went on so far in one of his rants before Congress to call coal trains death trains. Now, we all know that coal was responsible for a lot of deaths. And we know the smog. We know that the smog in England in the late 1800s killed people, and we certainly know about coal miners' lung disease, which kills people. But in any case, this last November, so we're only talking a month and a half ago, he said, we know, in fact, we reported on it, the temperatures in the Arctic hit 36 degrees above average. In fact, they were above freezing, and there was a spike. I mean, it was like a month-long spike where the temperature in the Arctic were above freezing. And then in September, which was about 3 months before that, it was reported that the average measurements of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere hit a record 400 parts per million. Now, those are facts. Don't tell me they're not facts.
Oh, yeah.
Talking about where the carbon dioxide came from, all I'm saying is that it has been measured now at 400 parts per million. And And he's currently deeply involved in a lawsuit against the federal government, and it was brought by 21 kids under the age of 21, including his granddaughter. And the argument was, now this has already been heard in federal court, the argument was that politicians knowingly allowed big polluters, that's crony capitalisms, to wreck the Earth's atmosphere and imperil the future well-being of young people in America. So this was brought up in a federal court, and the federal district judge in Oregon delivered an opinion. And this opinion, I applaud it, but he said that a stable climate is indeed a fundamental right. A fundamental right, clearing the way for the case to go to trial in 2017. So we want to follow that because this is something no federal judge has ever said that before.
Yeah, there's two. It cuts both ways in this. One of the things is that there are moves on the what we call the alt left to actually criminalize deniers of climate change. Now I'll mention a few of the drivers because I'm an environmentalist going back to Greenpeace in the early '70s, and I did oceanography work. What I see happening is the biggest danger right now is not just the carbon dioxide generation. The biggest danger, because it comes from natural, is the killing of the carbon-oxygen cycle by the benthic layer of the oceans dying from pollution and acidification, and cutting down the rainforest cuts out 50% of the rainforest, which makes about around 20%, 30% of the carbon-oxygen cycle recycling. 70 to 80% is the upper 10 meters of the ocean. And on top of that, we know that we're moving into a moderate cooling period, which happened 360 years ago. So we're moving into an ice age, and we're going to have what we call gear shifts, where you have spiking of temperatures. But we're also having the release of methane hydrates, and we really don't know why they're happening, but they do break down over 6 months and release carbon dioxide. And from the ocean floor, say out Pendleton, up in the permafrost. We also know that the nuclear plants are releasing radiotoxins like radioiodine and other gases like argon that are dangerous to the ozone layer, so that they can increase the ultraviolet light, which can damage the benthic layer of the oceans and the ability of phytoplankton to capture carbon dioxide in turn and release oxygen. So, unfortunately, they're only looking at one side of the equation, saying human-produced CO2 is killing us, when in fact, Mount Erebus in Antarctica makes the equivalent of 10,000 very large coal-fired generators. And the problem is more complex than the idea of simplifying to say you got to chase CO2, and if you chase it down, everything is going to be fine. When we have weather being modified by gravity waves from this dwarf star 0.73 light years out, when we have pollution from nuclear reactors affecting the ozone layer, and we have galactic and solar weather from this approaching dwarf star in the Oort cloud that can affect the release of earthquakes and volcanoes and climate change, because the fourth and fifth layer of the Van Allen radiation belt regulates our climate and our jet stream, and it's all over the place. So we're seeing what we call polar inversions. We're seeing lots of other things. So to simplify it and just say we have to stop generating carbon dioxide, I think we need to genetically engineer a new form of super phytoplankton to recolonize the oceans, so that even though the oceans are slightly acidic, we can actually overcome that and get the carbon oxygen cycle back on track. And then we also need to make sure that we're not fracking with chemicals, because it's toxic to water supply. And we do need to watch what is going on. Why are we getting so much release of methane hydrates? Because they are dangerous and they can cause a big temperature surge, in spite of the fact we're in a moderate cooling period. So I think the biggest problem is the people who try to pretend they're pundits and they know everything. They really don't. But there are some issues, and if we don't tease out exactly which one's the most important, it's my guess that the biggest one is the fact that we're killing the oceans with pollution and the benthic layer that makes most of our oxygen out of our carbon dioxide. Because the world concentration of oxygen has dropped from 21% around the Western world to 19%. So I think there's a lot of things that we don't yet understand, and we need to have more knowledge rather than jump to conclusions, either saying there's not a problem to keep on moving, or we need to actually figure out what the hell is going on and then do something about regenerating the benthic layer of the oceans with, say, genetically engineered phytoplankton, and make sure we monitor not only CO2 but other toxic gases that are affecting health and weather down here on the surface. So there's a lot of problems that we haven't addressed yet, and unfortunately they turn into a political football. It'll starve and freeze in the dark many of the second or third world countries, because you won't be able to generate power for food production or manufacturing. And so this is a global population control issue, as well as a climate issue.
Well, that's right. And the Montreal Protocol, which was updated to the Paris Protocol just this last year, which was signed on by nations around the world, was to keep the degree of warming to less than 2 degrees centigrade. Well, that's not going to do it, and the politicians know that it won't do it. I mean, this is not based on science. This is just words to make people feel comfortable. I mean, 2 degrees centigrade. Now, right now, the Earth's temperature is already well into the range that existed 120,000 years ago, and we call that the Eemian period. And it was the last time that the Earth was warmer than it is now. And that was the time when the sea level was 20 to 30 feet higher. So, during that period, the animals were what they call giant mammals. That was the age of the giant mammals. Just like the dinosaurs were big before the giant mammals. And that was when we had, not wildebeest, when we had mammoths and other...
Giant sloths and woolly mammoths, which are, some of them are really big. My friend who I went to high school with with the Bedford Institute, which is where I did some research in oceanography, and the Woods Hole, Massachusetts, the facility down in Massachusetts with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and they went up to Baffin Island, which is half the size of Australia, but it's up in the Arctic Circle, and they exhumed a tusk of a woolly mammoth that was 26 feet long.
Yeah.
So they estimate that the woolly mammoth was 12 times the size and mass of an African elephant.
That's right.
These are big animals.
The only mammals that survived were either evolved like giraffes. They grew long necks because of course the trees and the bushes, they grew very tall, and in order to keep up with their dinner, which was the leaves, they eventually evolved until they had long necks. Now, the only humans that survived were those who were either in the mountains or were in the treetops. And so we had the, what was the name of the early man,
Neanderthal man.
And he survived, but he was in the mountains. He survived in the Alps, I believe.
And Cro-Magnon was down in the trees in the plains.
That's right. He came out of the trees. Yeah. And, of course, Cro-Magnon finally killed all the Neanderthals. But in any case...
Not all of them. Apparently, according to the 23andMe, 2 to 3% of the DNA of Europeans is Neanderthal DNA. And the Neanderthal actually were in Northern Europe several 100,000 years before Homo sapiens arrived there.
Yeah, that's right. And they survived because they were at a high altitude, and the carbon dioxide will concentrate on the ground level. So you don't want to be in a valley. In fact, I tell my friends that they want to be in the 20th story of a tall building. And if you have a 3-story building, they should be sleeping, and the nursery should be on the 3rd floor. You want to get away from the basements or from first floor living. This is serious, and I have crystals that turn blue when there's too much carbon dioxide in the room. Of course, usually I just get a headache. Anyway, 2 degrees is dangerous, and it's not based on science, and it never had any scientific basis. So, are we past the point of no return? Well, if we leave it up to the governments, it sounds like it.
I'll lay out a plan that, you know how I always say I can provide a plan instantly, or a framework. There's 4 points to my plan. The first one is we need to genetically engineer new phytoplankton that can withstand the acid oceans and resurrect the carbon-oxygen cycle. Number 2, we need to start working toward, like the Chinese, to nuclear fusion technology. Number 3, we need to use what's called clean coal, and which we already have in Wyoming. In fact, the largest coal seam on the planet is up in Wyoming, and it has enough high anthracite coal that's low in sulfur and toxins, heavy metals. It could supply the world for 250,000 years in power. But we don't need to do that because we can transition to nuclear fusion technology. The third step is we need to do what's called, what I call prevention of, how can I say this? Of weather manipulation by our weapon systems. What we did as part of the U.S. Space Shield is we turned the upper atmosphere into a plasma as a way of defending against incoming nuclear missiles. but it also screws up the jet stream, and it probably screws up the normal climate, so you get these rapid shifts or heat inversions, polar inversions, and so on. So because we put nanoparticle thorium, strontium, barium, aluminum, it's probably a factor in why the climate quickly switches gears, and why we can get extreme weather hot in summer or winter. And the fourth area is we need to research why all of this sudden there's methane hydrates being released from the ocean floor and permafrost, because we don't know why that's happening. And methane hydrates can persist in the atmosphere up to 6 months before they convert to CO2, and they are a very powerful greenhouse gas. In fact, methane for methane hydrates is sometimes they think 16 to 20 times more thermally absorptive than CO2 alone. So I think part of our problem is we need to move to different technology, but we also need to resurrect the carbon oxygen cycle. I think our biggest problem is not how much pollution, how much CO2 we're generating. It's that we've turned the Earth into a planet that now has chronic obstructive Earth lung disease. So our planet has COPD, and as a result, it can't do marathon running, it can't do heavy exercise, and it can't convert the CO2 back into oxygen, because we've killed the benthic layer of the oceans and we've cut down the rainforest.
Yes, and the socio-ecological systems are very complex, and they're not being treated as complex. And we need some good systems engineers to work this problem. Now, I want to just jump into a specific problem that they're having over where peat grows. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that you've all heard about peat.
Yeah.
Peat is a plant, and it grows in certain environments, mostly where it's moist, damp, and that's where it grows. And then it dies off in the winter. And for centuries, probably centuries, it has been the custom of the farmers over in Britain and Europe is to keep the peat under control. That is, it's a weed to them, but they do use it for feeding their livestock. Now, peat burns, and so there's cases where there are peat burning fires, wood stoves. Well, peat stoves, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's also got insulator, and there are peat houses. But in any case, the main problem is that over the course of the last few centuries, what they've been doing is burying the edge of the peat so that it doesn't encroach on their farmlands.
Right.
And this was okay. But when they got to looking at it, what happened was that the peat is growing faster now because there's more carbon dioxide at the ground level.
Right.
And so it's growing faster, and it's encroaching. The fires keep getting bigger. And when they analyze the smoke from the fires, of course, what they're getting is carbon dioxide and methane. So I think you all remember the fire that was in Siberia about 4 years ago, because the Russians had drained the peat over there, the peat bogs, and into a lake. And they thought, well, this would be a good thing. We'll expose some land that we can use for farming. Well, what happened was when they dried out the peat, a lightning storm came along and set it on fire, and they couldn't put it out. There was no way. I mean, it burns really well.
Yeah.
And so that, they also have that problem now over in Europe and in Britain. So what are they going to do? Well, they're talking about what they're going to do. And there are people who think that they want to go back to the way it was. They want to make it, I think they use the term wilding. They want to turn it back into the pristine environment. But unfortunately, the climate is not for that, because when it was pristine, we didn't have so much carbon dioxide in the air.
Right. I think the theory is that pristine is rewilding, means it's going to be more ecologically robust to build up the carbon oxygen cycle or protect the environment. And I disagree. I think we can kind of use science to intervene so we can actually reduce the extinction level event of not only mankind but natural events that actually are causing trouble. So
But
I think that we don't need to kind of rush back and say we'll just rewild it and it'll all be fine. For example, what I would say is making hardier types of plants to survive the desert, so you get moisture. Um, peat, we could probably engineer a fungus to control the rate of growth or terminate it, so you could put it along the edges of it and just stop it from expanding. I'm certain that there's things that we could do that wouldn't be dangerous or harmful or get out of control genetically that could rebuild the phytoplankton in the ocean so you can get a lot more oxygen, and it would solve the problem. So
Well, this is under discussion right now over in Britain and in the European Union. So on one side is rewilding, which means that they wouldn't burn the peat at all. They would just spread out and take over land that is under cultivation now. And on the other side are the farmers who say, well, we've been doing this. My grandfather did it. My great-grandfather did it.
I think that both sides are wrong, and I think we need to think of a third way of approaching this. Would be a combination of advanced technologies to control the peat and stop producing pollution. I remember when I used to live in Nova Scotia, because I was raised there, everybody would burn their stuff in the backyard, and where I lived was near the agricultural college, and it was horrendous when people would start burning. You couldn't breathe straight. My brother with asthma would have horrible attacks, burn the eyes out of your head, and of course you can imagine what this stuff is doing if it's releasing toxic gases. If you have a large enough area burned, some of these gases get in the upper atmosphere and they can affect even the ozone layer. So,
well, that's right. And there's been a rapid, recent increase in global methane concentrations, and that's predominantly biogenic. That is, it has to do with land use, where if you've got bogs, you're going to have more methane, and and they can look at farming practices to.
That gives you another idea. I saw in Britain where they were recycling a lot of pig fecal matter and body parts, offal, and they recycled and generate methane and actually captured it in tanks. So what we could be doing is cutting up this peat and just recycling it, so that we actually convert it to methane and actually store it in tanks to be used as fuel. So you have a much more controlled use of it, rather than the idea of indiscriminate fires that generate a lot of other toxic things. And every time you use a fire, you're going to generate carbon dioxide because you're using up oxygen. The other thing, of course, is we have a lot of things that are using up oxygen pretty quick. For example, an Airbus A380 uses as much oxygen in 1 hour of flight as all the human beings breathing on Earth in 24 hours.
Well, that's a
lot of oxygen.
Well, they're not going to go after Boeing Airjets because of crony capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. So what we got to do is we got to say, okay, let's reseed the benthic layer of the oceans, because millions and millions of square miles of ocean can generate enough oxygen, everything's fine, but there is a limit. And the problem is the Earth does have a carrying capacity for population. What's happening right now is we're starting to reach several parameters of that carrying capacity. If this carbon oxygen cycle, which is what I'm really talking about rather than CO2, the reason the CO2 is just a symptom, and we also don't understand the other greenhouse gases like methane. Why is it being released from methane hydrates in the ocean floor and in the Gulf of Mexico and permafrost? Because we're getting a whole lot of it being released. And
off the coast of Oregon, too. They still haven't figured out why they have a
we don't understand that.
Off the coast of Oregon.
The fact that all this methane is being released is strange, because there's no precedent to say that it ever happened in the past.
That's right.
We don't know why it's being released, but it's being released. And it's not just in one area. It's not just permafrost. For example, there's released off of the coast of California, right here, right off of Pendleton Marine Corps base. It's only 10 miles away. The main coast.
Yeah, but there's a reason for that. That's because those drilling rigs send out their they make their wells flat. Well, they're not really flat. They probably have a 1 degree tilt to them, but they drill down in the ground 5 miles from the coast, and then they turn I don't know how they do it. They turn their rig, and it drills out under the ocean, and what does it find when it gets out there? Methane hydrate, and they've disturbed it.
Yeah, so there's probably something they're doing in their drilling practices that they're not good. Just like when we talk about fracking, I know that there's a number of red Democrats and the Republican Party is very much for fracking, but you can use non-chemical fracking that won't destroy the water table, but then you're going to have to recharge it with what's called primary water. And when I've talked to people, including the Water Authority here in California, they knew that Encinitas was trying to get primary water a dozen years ago, but none of the water engineers I've talked to had the faintest clue, even after I got well educated by Paul Power from the Primary Water Institute in Eureka, California, where he's been drilling in their team for 60 years, finding primary water, including in Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi, 75% of the new water was primary water refilling their lakes and reservoirs, which is the water that Oasis do, and they have to drill down about 2,400 feet in order to get it. So what I see happening is a lack of advanced science, a lack of innovative ideas, and they often give what's called a limited menu of responses, like the peat guys, where you either don't burn it or you rewild it, and both of those alternatives are not good. So it basically is like Forrest Gump says, stupid is as stupid does. And this is stupid.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about radiation.
Okay.
Now that we've talked about climate and government,
Uh-huh.
overuse of government.
Right.
Calvin Cliffs. It didn't really. Well, it might happen at Calvin Cliffs. There's a transducer component flaw in a part that is provided by ITT Iodine Inc. And what they did was that they discovered that unqualified electrical component substitutions on an internal circuit board were not working the way they should have been, and why they were using unqualified components is being looked at.
Right. So
so
some engineer and accountant got together and decided to substitute the parts because they say, hey, heck, it'll probably work.
No, it's crony capitalism.
That's what I mean. They got an accountant.
Who wants to supply these, and who will give me the biggest kickback?
Exactly. In other words, an accountant and an engineer with a sharp pencil.
Yep. Okay. So the reason I mentioned Calvert Cliffs is because it's got 30 of these, and Ontario Power Generation has 31, and there's a UK company that's got 78. And these things can break at any time. I mean, you don't know if that transducer is working right or not. But apparently what they're going to do is they're going to wait for it breaks before they they replace it with something that's qualified. Anyway, I am not kidding.
Now, is this by breaking?
If any component, let me read this.
Yeah.
If any component fails to meet requirements, nuclear facilities will use this product will be advised to examine their product for unqualified printed circuit boards via notification and visual references. And qualified replacement components will be provided to all affected customers. So they're going to wait for it to fail and possibly cause a nuclear accident before they even look to see if it's qualified or not.
Now,
I had to laugh at that.
That is too crazy. Now, the other thing is that before you get
is not only unethical, I think it's illegal.
It seems like grossly illegal. The other thing is, before you have a major accident, I've had very good references that up to 3/4 of the nuclear reactors in America are constantly releasing lots of radiation of tritium, thorium, and some other isotopes. In other words, they're leaky as hell.
Yeah.
And they often wait for a major system breakdown that'll really release a big surge of radiation. And we talk about this with RadCon, and you do discussions anywhere from like 2 sites to a dozen sites each week of a nuclear reactor in a town or city is releasing radiation in zones around their, 5 miles, 10 miles, 20 miles, 100 miles. And the markers that I've been taught are small for taste babies, congestive heart failure, dementia, and super infections like pneumonia or other major immune system failure, and cancer rates. So if you look at some of these marker diseases, the closer you are to any nuclear reactor in America, the higher the rate is. Small for
Well,
D,
I work
maybe.
for the DOE, and they don't measure it that way.
No, I know that, but I'm talking about with public health. The public health
All
people.
right, the other one place I want to talk about is the Cook, DC Cook reactor in Michigan, and it's right on it's on Lake Michigan.
Right.
And there's over 1 million people within a 50-mile radius.
Whoa.
Now, it was in hot shutdown, and it's still in hot shutdown, which means that it is like the Chernobyl reactor that caused the fission event in Russia.
Right.
Now, while they were they were inspecting their emergency diesel generators. Because when they start up, they may need the emergency diesel generators to get the plant going again. And 3 of them were declared inoperable due to discovered design and manufacturing issues.
No.
And, and because Unit 2 is inoperable, well, they're both inoperable because of the hot shutdown, there's a loss of safety function because they can't mitigate the consequences of an accident,
right.
Obviously. And so I got to say this. I'm reading it directly from the NRC. Unit 1 maintenance will be prioritized over Unit 2, and Unit 2 will most likely proceed to Mode 5. Okay. So they're going to fix some of them, and maybe they'll get them all working before they try to start up the nuclear power plant. Bad stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, and RadCon, and that's what Dr. Deagle, he was looking ahead, and we do have one station of concern in Cookeville, Tennessee, and if you scroll down, Dr. Deagle, you're going to see that I know you always ask me, how close are they to a nuclear power plant? And on this map, I've got all the power plants, and I have Cookeville, Tennessee, with a red cross there.
Right.
And so there's Watts Bar nuclear plant, Nisquoia nuclear plant. And then the other ones are fossil plants, which we don't expect would be radioactive.
Right.
So the prevailing wind blows west to east, but in order for its high gamma count, the wind would have to be blowing east to west. So I cannot tell you why Cookeville, Tennessee has a current 26 counts per minute of gamma radiation in the 600 to 800 mega electron volt range. And I would suggest that the people in Baker's Crossroads, Tennessee, contact their emergency manager either at the city or county level or even state level and find out why they had why they are being battered by gamma rays.
Yeah, gamma's bad stuff. It destroys DNA.
Yeah. Well, that's about all I've got.
The only other story I see here, you didn't talk about the ozone hole.
Well, they can
or
look
the
at
comments. I could do comments we mentioned on the show.
I really want to, if you want to talk about something.
Yeah.
Okay, go down into seismic.
Yeah.
And the fourth one down is not just fracking. And there's a new database of human-induced quakes. And I found this article very interesting because we talk about fracking, and we know that the number of earthquakes in Oklahoma, the largest of which has been magnitude 5.5 on the Richter scale, enhanced Richter scale. But there are other things that produce earthquakes, and some of them are like water reservoirs behind dams and mining. And so there's an oil sands mine in Canada, which looks like a big open pit iron mine or copper mine, and it because they well, they've been studying, and they discovered that the induced earthquakes are tremendously underreported. Now, I discovered that when I was a newbie looking into this back in the 1990s, was that those earthquake sensors, the sensors report anything that moves the earth, which is nice. And then a seismologist has to look at it and say, oh, yeah, that's an earthquake. Well, sometimes they look at it and they'll say, no, that was a landfall, or that was blasting at a quarry. And so they just explain them away that way. And so somebody decided to look for the quakes, and they found currently it's 715 earthquake sequences, and it's 4 triggers: surface operations, such as quarrying, building structures, and impounding water reservoirs. That's like behind a dam. Injecting material into the subsurface, such as wastewater disposal and fracking. Removing material from a subsurface, such as mining or pumping water for irrigation. And explosions from underground nuclear tests, which I think we know.
Right.
And they may just say, initially they started looking at earthquakes after the countries decided to do underground nuclear testing. Then they would look at the seismic monitors, and they could tell the difference between an underground nuclear test and an earthquake. So they didn't report any earthquakes that occurred as a result of the underground nuclear test. They just said, oh, well, that, it's just because they're testing nuclear devices underground. Well, it's creating earthquakes, and they weren't reporting it.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're starting to, they built this catalog, and by the way, I do want you to look at, where is it? Hawthorne, Nevada earthquake. It's about towards the end of the earthquake list. And I have a USGS World, the last week of earthquakes. And if you look on the United States West Coast, what you're going to find is that there's a series of circles there. And this happened at southwest of Hawthorne, Nevada, and there was a series of earthquakes that occurred at that point. The largest one was a 5.5. And that happens a lot of times. An earthquake will occur, they'll record it, and then there'll be aftershocks.
Ah.
Yeah, and
well,
so
we know
these,
that's amazing. I know in Oklahoma they've had to shut down a lot of their operations because they triggered off. They call them frac quakes.
Well, yeah, there's frac quakes, which we just talked about. There's dam quakes. I like that, dam quakes.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. Well, I think that's that's enough for tonight.
That's really good. Thank you, Ann, and Happy New Year. You've done an amazing job, and I'm sure we will continue to do the best we can to provide good science information. And by the way, all the people listening, do donate to Ann and give her your thanks by supporting her hard work to generate this amazing science material and all these great videos we put together for you. Take care.